Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our latest Multimodal Connect webinar. Today, we'll be taking a dive into the world of rail freight. It's been an interesting time, obviously, for everybody. COVID, Brexit, you name it, Suez Canal, the world's gone mad. But one of the shining lights that's come out of this is the resilience of the rail freight sector. And we're here to work out for your benefit, how best to move your cargo by rail and how to get more freight on rail. What do you need to know and what sort of volumes and flows might you consider? You're viewing this webinar on our swap card platform. It allows you to network with other attendees and also to ask questions. And you'll see the question panel and the comments panel just to the right of the screen. So please pop your questions in there and the panel will do their best to answer them as we go through the webinar. To kick things off, it gives me great pleasure to introduce your moderator for the day, Maggie Simpson, OBE. She is the Director General of the Railfreight Group. She will introduce the rest of the panelists. Maggie joined the Railfreight Group in 2005 as Policy Manager and in 2012 became its Director General. Maggie works to influence the growth of rail freight, which means she spends time with opinion formers, politicians, railway bodies, and the companies that make up Railfreight Group's membership. A big part of the RFG's work is making sure that railway and government policy supports the rail freight sector. Before joining RFG, Maggie was working in safety and risk assessment for a consultancy, and that's where she started working with railway clients. This gave her a really good introduction to the rail sector. From there, she went on to OPRAF. I don't know what that is, no doubt she'll explain, managing franchise contracts, and then onto the Strategic Rail Authority in their freight team. Maggie, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for the introduction. OPRAF was the Office of Passenger Rail Franchising, at which point I discovered that rail passenger is really boring. And as soon as we discovered rail freight, we've not looked back since then. So a long time ago now, but thank you for that introduction and indeed for the invitation to come along today and chair this panel. I think it's a really timely panel, a really great lineup of speakers who we'll introduce to you shortly, and great to see that so many of you have joined us today to find out a bit more about moving your cargo by rail. I've done enough webinars to know that many of you here today already know quite a lot about moving your cargo by rail, but if there are questions and thoughts that you've got, things that you want to discuss, opportunities you want to explore, then please do, as Robert says, put your questions into the platform and we'll be picking them up a little bit later on and getting the discussion going. I think, as Robert said, in the last year, we've seen a really increased focus in public consciousness about freight movements in general. The twin challenges of Brexit and COVID, not least a certain ship that blocked the Suez Canal not so many weeks ago, and indeed toilet roll gate back in lockdown 1 has all brought home to people just how important it is that we move freight around effectively and efficiently across the country and indeed across the world. It isn't something that people often think about. It certainly isn't something that government ministers have always thought about. But I think in the last 12 months, that government and indeed the general public have come to realise just how important it is, but also how resilient and how flexible it is, how apart from toilet roll gate, the shelves haven't been empty. People have responded, goods have got through. And despite all the challenges that have been thrown at us, the freight transport sector has coped. It's changed, it's responded, and no, so, you know, across all sectors of freight, including rail. But of course, these things don't come without consequences. And when I talk to customers at the moment, there's a clear sense that they're looking to increase the resilience of their supply chains to better cope with these kinds of structural shocks. And people are looking at all kinds of different angles on that, increased warehousing driven by a rebalance perhaps between online and high street, between perhaps a pulling back slightly on just in time. People are looking at diversifying their supply chains, using different trading routes, maybe using a wider range of points of entry into the country and different modes. And of course, when we start talking about different modes, that's lots of different things. But of course, it brings into the mix rail freight and of course water freight as well in some instances. But the other big factor that is really important when I talk to customers is sustainability. And I think it's been amazing to see how the narrative around decarbonisation and sustainability hasn't been drowned out by COVID and the global pandemic. In fact, it's been strengthened by it. I think people are more aware of the challenges of reducing carbon emissions and becoming more sustainable than they were even a year ago. And rail freight is acknowledged for its sustainable performance, and it's bringing people to rail freight when they want to drive the sustainability of their supply chains. And so, of course, that's a really positive environment for our industry. It's also something that's hopefully leading to growth. But we need to make sure that rail freight as a sector can respond to that challenge, and that we can continue to delight the customers that we have and the customers that we hope to have in the future. And so today's webinar is a really good chance to explore some of these points, to look at how businesses can make more use of rail and how the sector itself can respond to that challenge, support growth, encourage growth, bring new parties to play, and evolve itself to meet the expectations of the changing supply chains and changing business world that will inevitably occupy in the post-COVID environment. Now, I'm joined by the most expert of expert panels. It's some brilliant faces on here. So what I'm going to do now is introduce each of them in turn and ask for a few opening remarks from everyone. Once we've done that, we'll then pick up some questions and go obviously onto the questions that have been posted by you listening in today. Please do keep them coming. I'm going to do this in the order that I've been given them, so no particular order, so please don't feel offended if you're last. So let me start. Our first panellist is Emma Dempsey, the Chief Commercial Officer for Genesee and Wyoming, UK. Emma joined G&W as Chief Commercial Officer last April, which was a great time to start. Emma, well done. Congratulations on the dawn of a pandemic. She's a member of the senior leadership team there. For those of you who don't know Genesee and Wyoming, their more familiar trade brands would be Freightliner and Pentalva in the UK. Emma started her career at Accenture UK, and she's progressed through a number of businesses there, including Marks and Spencer's, Unipart, and most recently, Chief Operating Officer at Clipper Group before coming across to G&W last year. Emma, great to have you on the panel. If you wanted to just say a few words of intro, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be part of the panel today. I'm relatively new into rail freight myself, and so it's been baptism of fire over the last 12 months. And as you say, joined at a very busy time. But I was really kind of encouraged to see how our sector responded really to the pandemic. And we are seeing, I think, across our sector, a number of customers coming to us now asking about how we support their rail freight, I guess, objectives going forwards. And we're really keen on the sustainability angle and demonstrating to our customers how we can improve their carbon footprint. And so I think it's a really timely, it's really timely to have this discussion, and welcome some of the topics on the table today. So thank you very much for letting me join the panel.
Thank you, Emma. Brilliant. Our next panellist is Steve Freeman, the Managing Director of iPort Rail. Steve's been at iPort since its inception in 2018 and overseen the opening of the terminal and its rise into success. Steve's got over 40 years in the global rail industry with a strong background in rail operations, business startup and development, leadership and project delivery, both in the UK and indeed globally. So Steve, thank you for joining us today. If you wanted to give us a few opening remarks, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be invited to partake in this webinar myself. I think you're absolutely right. It is a very timely moment for us to be having this discussion. So I look forward to some interesting questions and hopefully some equally interesting answers.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, our third panellist is John Williams, the Executive Chairman of Maritime Transport. When we were on the tech test yesterday, John explained to me that he wasn't a disruptor, but that's exactly what John's been all the way through his career. He's established and run numerous successful transport ventures in UK and Europe. He's had an influential role in shaping the landscape of transport for almost 40 years. He's the owner and executive chairman of Maritime Transport Limited, and he's overseen their growth since its inception. He's led the company from strength to strength, including their move into rail freight in 2011. John, joy to have you on the panel to give us a few words of intro. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie, for that introduction. I was always told that the definition of expert is X is an unknown factor and spurt is a fast drip. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here. Being called a disruptor as well. Well, I think we're the smallest rail freight operator in the sector. We operate 10 trains on a daily basis, working with DB Cargo and with GB Rail Freight. We also work with G&WMS. So yes, looking forward to participating in the forum today. And I just want to make it clear that none of us are getting paid for this today.
We're not, which is always the case. And our final panellist, Martin Woor, who's the Senior Manager for Strategic Rail Network Development at Hutchison Ports UK. Martin's been at the port for a number of years and now has specific responsibility for strategic and commercial rail development at the port. And he has 30 years plus experience in the port sector within container, ro-ro, general cargo, forest products and warehousing sector. Martin, pleasure to have you on the panel. Do you want to give us a few thoughts by way of introduction? Thank you.
I've been at the for some over the last 5-6 years. I've focused primarily on the rail side of the business. So growing significantly over the last few years and continue to do so. And indeed, the 4 years ago is the largest single generator of intermodal traffic network. We operate 3 dedicated rail terminals, the most recent was the North Rail Terminal opened in 2013. Presented an investment of some 40 million. Terminals at all 4 Phoenix rail operators not use the facilities offering access. Currently we have 3 regular operators using the port and Freightliner, GG Railfreight, DP Cargo and our partnership association with Maritime transport. So my D3 operators are handling 36 trains in every day, Monday to Friday, and offering regular service to 16 different destinations. These destinations include but are limited to Freightliner facilities in Manchester, Birmingham, iPort, Doncaster, Maritime. So the majority of services connect all 3 main geographical areas: the North West, Yorkshire, and the Midlands. So as you can see, Phoenix are well connected to both the North Powerhouse and the Midlands engine. We also have day-to-day services covering Glasgow. So by capacity improvements completed in 2019 by Network are funded by the port to provide the opportunity for further growth. It is obviously important because capacity is matched by similar improvements elsewhere on the network. Going forward, we see rail as very much a critical part of the port offer to our customers. As it offers many supply chain advantages such as efficiency of movement, and also the environmental benefits. I'm sure we'll discuss those in more detail during the course of this session.
Thank you, Martin. We're losing you a little bit on the sound there. I think we got the drift of what you were saying, but I don't know whether colleagues on the call can just work with you a little bit on that sound. If there's some way I don't know whether it was just me, but that was terribly crackly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't hear it very well.
No. Okay. I don't know whether Lara, there's anything we can do, or we could get the gist of it, Martin, but it was a little bit crackly. Anyway, whilst I'll leave colleagues to just ask some questions about that, but let us move on then into the substance of the discussion if we can. Some opening questions perhaps from me, and then we'll look to Robert to feed in some that are being asked on the platform. So I guess my starter for 10 then. How is rail freight contributing to the decarbonisation of transport, and why should businesses look to rail freight to increase their sustainability? Don't know if somebody would like to come in on that.
Happy to open, Maggie. These are conversations we're having all the time with our customers, and the statistic we often quote is that there's 76% fewer emissions per tonne for every tonne moved by rail versus by road, and so there's an obvious kind of a carbon footprint benefit in moving freight by rail. I guess I would add to that over the past months, certainly we at Freightliner have been trialling and operating longer trains where we can get up to 14 additional containers on the 775 metre trains. This further reduces the carbon emissions per tonne and makes it far more efficient and cost effective for our customers also. So I think in hand with being more carbon efficient, there's obviously the benefits around efficiency when we're running longer and heavier trains. we always work with our customers when they come to talk to us about their requirements on freight, to look at the right blend of road and rail, because we recognise that it's not always 100% by rail. We operate a road network as well, and so we work with our customers to work out both an economic business case and an environmental business case, almost, of moving the whatever volume they have by rail and being able to articulate what that looks like in terms of the carbon footprint reduction. And so we always find a business case when it comes to looking at the carbon footprint for our customers.
Yes, I think the other statistic that does the rounds is that one train equals 17,000 trucks off the road every year. And as the largest container transport company in the country, some people think that it's a bit bizarre that I'm promoting rail, but from a sustainability point of view, you can also look at it another way. You know, there are 5,000 trucks in and out of the Port of Felixstowe on a daily basis, Martin. About 2,500 in and out of Southampton, about 1,500 at a gateway, and these trucks are doing, 2 to 3 hours before they actually get anywhere. And so we're filling up the M3, we're filling up the M25, we're filling up the A12 and the A14. So, and we've got drivers driving those trucks. And drivers are becoming a precious resource. So if we can get the containers inland and we can do more local first mile, final mile with our vehicles, and we can organize shifts for drivers that are more sympathetic with the way that people want to work these days. We're finding it really difficult to get drivers who are happy to sleep 3 or 4 nights in a tin box in motorway services and work in the way that the container transport has been set up over the last 30, 40 years. So sustainability, I don't think it's just about the environment, it's about finding labour happy to do and work in that way.
Yeah, I would echo that, John. And I think the other thing I'd like to add is that we're increasingly finding at iPort that more and more of our customers, both the anchor customers at iPort and beyond that, are asking those sustainability questions about, how can we get into rail it's about making themselves look sustainable and reducing their own carbon footprints. And I think more and more people are recognizing that rail is a viable alternative.
Martin, are you seeing that trend at the port as well?
I think just picking up on Steve's point there. Can you best give me or is that still quite crackly?
That's still quite crackly to me. I don't know. Is that?
Yeah, it's to me.
Yeah.
It is here.
Yeah. I don't know if you've anything else open that's providing some feedback, but
nothing. So I'm not sure what can be done but
so sign out and sign back in again.
Yeah, so carry on and I'll rejoin, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So I think, but I'm sure if we could hear Martin, he'd be, explaining the same thing. I think what the trend we've been seeing at the Port of Felixstowe and indeed other ports is that, as new trains become available, as new paths are found on the network, those slots are filling up, and we're back, although you're back up to full strength out of Felixstowe now and indeed the other ports as well, with demand for longer trains and more trains. So absolutely seeing that sustainability in that part of the business coming through into growth. But I think if we looked forward, we know that we've got a strong track record in certain parts of the freight and transport economy. But what do we think the key opportunities are in the next 5 years to do more, both in sort of existing sectors, but also more generally across the logistics sector? John, I'm going to start with you because you have a good insight across the whole of UK logistics. Where do you think the opportunities are?
Well, I think that our vision, where we see the opportunities, is really converting domestic cargo from trailers by road into containers by rail. But that's the viability of that needs to be demonstrated, and I think customers do want to support that if the service is there to do it. And this is a massive market. The intermodal sector. It is growing, but I think rail freight has been really successful in securing a substantial share of that, up to about 30%. I think there's still got more to go, and I think the modal shift revenue support scheme should be modified to give even more incentives to convert even more of the intermodal market by rail. But then you need the network to support that, and you need the pathways into the ports to be able to achieve higher volumes. I mean, what we seem to have, coming down the line is enough inland rail terminals. We're seeing more of them, and we've got 5, and we're growing them. We might have some more in the next year or so. But it's all very well having loads of inland rail terminals, but you need the rail capacity, and the East Coast Main Line is a really big brake on the amount of containers we can evacuate out of Felixstowe, and also the Trimley line, Martin, and the number of paths into the port. So, getting anything done in the railway industry, it takes time because you're dealing with local authorities and government and big stakeholders, so things don't happen overnight. But going back to the domestics, to the domestic piece, we want to create a network in the country so that we can move cargo with people, some of our customers like IKEA, Mars, Nestle, Tesco, between Wales and Scotland, between East Midlands Gateway and Glasgow. So that's the vision we see, and I see the potential of buying a large fleet of pallet-wide containers instead of a large fleet of curtain-sided trailers. So that's what I see. I hope to see.
Absolutely right, John. Yeah.
Steve.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I think the huge opportunity where we sit at the moment, Maggie, is for rail freight to increase its market share. Now, how do we do that? It's easy enough to say, but it's been stuck where it is for many, many years. I think leveraging on the carbon reduction and sustainability credentials that we have is one thing. Clearly, there are opportunities, I think, at the moment for us to increase freight paths across the UK, offer more capacity and wider choice of destinations. And one of the things that we're trying to do at iPort is we're working very closely with people like ABP at Humberside and our customers to encourage the customers and their shippers to, instead of throwing everything through the southern ports of Southampton and Felixstowe, to start thinking about the more eastern coast ports of Humberside and, dare I say, Teesport as well. We're working with ABP at Immingham, Hull to look at a test train that we're hoping to run later this year, shuttle service between the ports of Immingham and iPort, which will have the capacity to run four times a day. We think we can get the volumes to make that happen. So do ABP, which is why we're progressing with it. There's still a long way to go yet, but all the mood music seems to be coming from our clients that they're happy to do that and are looking forward to being able to do that as well. So I think there are opportunities for us into inland rail terminals and for the rail freight industry generally to start looking at wider sort of choice of located destinations, if it were, and more freight paths.
And Martin, Steve's right there. We're seeing some dislocation of trade away from conventional points of entry to the UK. But in my sense is that the big ports, aren't going to be empty anytime soon, and that actually that dislocation of trade is a big opportunity for rail, because it means in totality we can do more as we create capacity from places like Felixstowe and Southampton and in places like Immingham and Tees as well. Is that how it feels for you on the ground? Where do you see the opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's right, Maggie. Firstly, is the sound any better?
Yes.
Oh, good, excellent. It worked. Yeah, I think the reality of the situation is that certainly the big ships arriving from the Far East, which is the predominant trade lane, of course, aren't going to go anywhere else apart from the established big ports in the south of England. And indeed, 70%, the real destination of 70% of all the import cargo coming into Felixstowe is to the Midlands and the north, basically. So that corridor is very important, as I think I said in my introduction, to both the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine. There are some opportunities at the moment for rail freight, particularly. Obviously, I assume that everyone's mentioned the carbon agenda. which is obviously, you know, very much at the forefront of government thinking at the moment. So there's a real opportunity to buy into that. But in the short term, of course, we have the effect of the pandemic on the passenger services, which mean they're somewhat reduced. So there may be some opportunities there. I mean, whether the services come back to the same extent they were pre-pandemic or not, I think the jury's still out on that one, quite frankly. But longer term, of course, we've also got HS2, which hopefully can free up some paths on the West Coast main line for freight as well. So there's a real opportunity for rail freight to demonstrate the efficiency of distribution that it offers, particularly with the container ships getting bigger and bigger, and the actual number of containers that require inland distribution are huge, basically. And obviously rail is a very effective and efficient way of moving large number of boxes in one hit. At the same time, we've also got more inland destinations coming on stream, of course. I mean, obviously, we've most recently had iPort Rail and John's Terminal at East Midlands Gateway, but also in the pipeline, we've got places like Hinckley, Four Ashes, Northampton Gateway, for example. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for rail freight.
And Emma, you know, you've come to rail from a background in logistics, so you know you can see the wider perspective. But within G&W, where do you see the key opportunities being for growth in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there will be organic growth, natural organic growth through the ports, because, as you say, I think we'll continue to see bigger vessels calling into the UK with more boxes on them. But I do echo John's view in that I think there is a huge untapped market, which is the domestic market, that actually rail is extremely well set up for in terms of its locations. We have terminal locations right across the UK, from, you know, the furthest northeast to the furthest southwest, should I say. And genuinely, I think there's an opportunity to make more use of those terminals. We have inland terminals in the UK, some of which are underutilised, and we have customers driving product past those terminals on a daily basis. And so genuinely, I think there is opportunity. And what we're finding increasingly is that customers are willing to collaborate to make those opportunities work. So where we've got customers who have kind of complementary volume sets, I guess, which means that it justifies full train loads worth of boxes. We think we can start to see a kind of a domestic market opening up, and the rail operators and the terminal operators. I'm sure John will agree with me. We have to, by definition, collaborate, because we have an open network, but we are collaborating much more than we were, so that we're not creating latent capacity in the rail network. We're creating capacity that everybody can make their best use of. And so I think in the estimations that we've done, only 2% of the potential market that we could go out and buy rail freight domestically is currently operated on rail. And so it's a huge market for us. I really do believe that to make this happen, it's about getting consortiums of customers to work together to make sure that we can find complementary flows and complementary volume sets that mean that we can run operations that work for our customers and are economically viable for the rail operators also. But 100% domestic is, I think, where the big growth will be in the coming years.
And Emma, without going into commercial space, do you think we've got the right sort of models in place for driving that collaboration? Because, you know, rail freight historically has tended to be based around the train load, and, you know, that's been the prevailing model. Intermodal always a little bit different, but, you know, what else do we need to do for those smaller consignments, for fast moving goods?
Yeah.
Have we got the right technology, data? You know, what is it that we think we need to shift in that space?
I mean, I think in my experience, and it's a relatively short time in rail, but we have customers with big volume commitments to us daily, but we have a good capacity. A good 30% of our capacity is more of a spot market, which means customers can transact with us today to move a box tomorrow. So it doesn't necessarily follow that you can't use rail freight if you don't have, you know, if you don't have the large volumes. I do believe that the sector is moving a little bit from a technology point of view to make it much easier to access kind of booking of rail, and at the moment probably not there, but I do know we certainly at G&W are making a huge multi-million-pound investment into technology and systems and operating systems that will allow for customers to transact more easily with us, and that that's happening across the sector. So I think that will open the door, because certainly on the roadside and in general logistics, those kind of, I guess, methods of technology transfer and data transfer have been in existence for years. And so it does lag behind slightly in rail, but I'm quite encouraged by what I see from the operators, terminal operators and the ports actually in terms of technology development.
Steve, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I would agree with Emma completely there. One of the things that we've been working on for a while is some technology which will give particularly the smaller users of rail, or the smaller companies that want to use rail, more ready access to the spot places that you're talking about, Emma. I mean, there's an awful lot of space running around on our freight services at the moment, which could be accessed and utilised more readily. So we're working with our customers and with others to try and make that happen. And I think to go back to your other point about collaboration, that's an absolutely vital point. If we all collaborate with one another, we will move forward so much more quickly.
John?
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I think collaboration within obviously the correct parameters. We can't go into the commercial space, but I think people who are engaged in the industry really get engaged because they want to grow rail freight, not to cannibalize somebody else's business. So so that's what we want to do, and we want to bring in a new dimension as well, and and develop this domestic distribution and create this nationwide network of rail terminals with different services connecting them, not just from the port, but from one inland location to another. And maybe we get to the point where a train from Avonmouth can call at Bift and can go on to Wakefield, or a train from Felixstowe can go on to EMG and then go on to Trafford Park. So that's where we're looking to see and get the benefits. And I think that what more can be done? I think none of us, I don't think, want to operate relying on the government for a handout or subsidy, because it can always be removed at the next meeting of the Treasury or whatever. But modal shift revenue support, that's been around for quite a long time. And back in the day, only one company benefited from it because there was only one intermodal operator in that sector. And back in the day, we're talking 1995, as a man of a certain vintage, I can remember these days all too clearly. So it was, I think, £27 million back in the day, Maggie, wasn't it? So, and as I said, one company was the only operator in the sector. Now, I think the subsidy is down to 20 million. And there are at least 10 separate companies applying for that subsidy. And to put that into context, you look at what's happening to the passenger network right now. It's in what's called emergency services. And up until this pandemic, the network, the rail industry wasn't even in the top 20 issues concerning the government. I understand it's the second issue that's affecting it now. And that's after the NHS itself, because it's tanking by about £1 billion a week. I mean, that's really serious money. But through it all, the freight part of it is chugging along and being quite resilient, actually. Yeah. So the modal shift revenue support, that needs, I think, to be overhauled, to be more appropriate, because you can have two different companies going from Felixstowe to Trafford Park. One service gets a subsidy and the other one doesn't. How can that make any sense? But I think that in terms of the domestic side, if there was some incentives to convert to using rail, to bridge the gap between the cost and what the customer is prepared to pay, that obviously would help move matters along much quicker.
Martin, from your perspective, you're dealing with shippers who have come from places that far away. In terms of what they're looking for in terms of commercial model data transfer incentives, what do they tell you about what would encourage them more onto rail?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously the cargo is either controlled by the exporter or the importer. And quite frankly, I think a lot of end users, if you like, are just interested in getting their cargo delivered on time at the right price. Having said that, of course, I think there is a lot of value in being associated with carbon reduction and the environmental benefits of rail freight. I mean, in terms of information flows, I think what's important to the port is early information, accurate information. We've been talking to a couple of our larger shipping line customers recently about the possibility of providing pre-nomination information in terms of boxes that are destined to travel onwards by rail. Now, I mean, that allows us to plan a lot more accurately and make sure that the boxes are actually positioned in the right position in the container park. So transparency of information is very important going forward, particularly as, you know, more and more rail services come on stream and the freight activity gets busier and busier.
Okay, Robert, have we got some questions coming in from the audience, please?
We do, but we always have time for more. There's one that I think, just based on what we've been talking about, is especially relevant, and it's from an importer who would like to know if there is a minimum load requirement to ship via rail.
Emma, do you want to pick that one up?
We have, I mean, the way we have different weight requirements. We effectively price differently for different weights of boxes. Yes, I think it's 26 ton and above it attracts a different price, but I have to say, I don't think I'm not aware of a minimum.
Would you be looking at a minimum volume?
Minimum volume, no. As I say, Maggie, we our spot capacity means that we can take one box, or we can, if a customer is looking for a committed capacity daily, that tends to really only work if you have kind of, I guess, 5 boxes or more. But we will commit to 1 box on a service for a customer if that's their only demand. And so there is no minimum. Often customers who don't have that kind of volume would rather sort of shop around and buy on the spot market because they might find themselves getting a better rate like that. But there's no minimum in terms of volume commitment at all, no.
So effectively, the risk sits with companies like yourself and Maritime to provide a service that you'll sell out.
Yeah, so we I mean, all of us have a kind of mix of contracted commitment on that train and wagons which are where we have capacity for the spot market. And it really depends. Some very popular corridors mean that you can often sell the whole train on a contract basis and so have no spot capacity. But usually that means that you can place and that you can run another service and fill it also with spot traffic. So there is always spot capacity in the rail freight market for customers to access. And we certainly don't ever work. We certainly don't ever want to put a minimum on a customer because we want to obviously attract the freight and attract the volume. That said, there's clearly volume discounts for customers, and if they can provide more volume to us, and so economically it's a much better case if you've got more volume. But it's a minimum load in terms of volume, absolutely not.
And John, I mean, I'm assuming it's similar in your business, but when you talk both about, obviously the questions come from somebody who's an importer, but you know, in the domestic routes that you're looking to open up, would that model still work for that?
Yes, I mean, you don't have to impose any sort of minimum on clients, and you know, the smallest customer can eventually grow to be a substantial customer for you. So you want to encourage that relationship, really. So
yeah.
We don't impose any limits. I'm happy to work for anyone.
And I'm just expanding the question a bit. Obviously, you know, one of the challenges that freight has in all moves is obviously balancing loads in both directions. So, Steve, you know, how do you work at iPort in terms of trying to make sure the trains fall in both directions, or indeed the trucks? Frankly, you know, it's the same question.
Yeah, I mean, it is a case. I mean, it's not always easy because we're in a very much import into iPort rail with exports. And exports are very low, so it's generally empties that are leaving us to go back to the ports. But what we're seeking to do is to actively encourage. So we're talking to customers around the area, the region of South Yorkshire and beyond and into Lincolnshire, about their flows either to the south or even to the north, so that we can get some of this backflow back onto the trains. The number of trains that currently are leaving iPort with 50%, 20% some days loads, some days even less than that, back to Southampton, back to Felixstowe. It's pretty scandalous, to be honest. So that's a real key thing for us, is to try and get our customers that have got things to run back in that direction to use the rail.
Yeah, I guess ultimately the UK needs to export more, but
it's challenging. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Maggie. It is very challenging. Okay.
Robert, have we got another question coming?
Yes, I'm going to read this one out because I'm not quite sure I understand it. But does the panel see operators and ports supporting the SRFI planning applications, as with support from the sector? Government are surely more likely to get on board and recognise rail freight as a driver for growth.
Yeah, open question, but let me answer it from Rail Freight Group. If we have a member company at Rail Freight Group who is going through a big planning application for a location, then we will stand behind and support that. I mean, I should add, we support all our members, so no port is better than any other port, and no operator is better than the other operator. But our experience is that we will stand behind and support, and Network Rail have also always been very supportive in coming forward for new developments. And I'll come to the panel in a moment, but I'm being one of the questions I get asked a lot of the times is, how many do you need? How many SRFIs should there be? And it is a good question around the need to agglomerate rail services to be financially viable. But equally, I would add that every warehouse that goes on a rail link site can use rail, and every warehouse that goes on a road link site can't. So if what we're trying to do is build warehousing, then how many SRFIs should we have is a different question in some respect. So I think that's that. But support for development of terminals. I mean, John, you're in this space.
Yes, and strategic rail freight interchanges. There seem to be more of them in the planning stages, and as you say, it's led by developers wanting to develop large warehousing, and as a condition of planning, the planners insist on there being a rail terminal there without actually specifying the size of it, or the capability of it, or the depth of concrete, or how many containers high. All of that is pretty vague, as long as it ticks a box that there will be some kind of rail capacity on that facility, and it ticks a box, and then developers can go out and build, big sheds. But like I said earlier, we've got to marshal all the components in order to put more by rail, and that means more rail capacity, especially the East Coast main line, and that means the Trimley section between Ipswich and Felixstowe, in order to put more by rail. No point just creating more inland rail capacity. As Emma touched on, there is some capacity at some of the existing terminals. And what we don't want is some being established within 20, 25 miles of another and cannibalizing the work. So you end up with two terminals not making money.
Yeah.
No one achieves anything of that.
I think the key's in the acronym, John, isn't it? Strategic. And they need to be strategically placed. And to do that, there needs to be a strategy, a UK-wide strategy that says this is where we need these SRFIs to be built, and this is how they will function with one another.
And I echo your views, guys. And I also think, having come from a warehousing, logistics and fulfillment background, as the planners are building the warehouses and engaging with potential customers to occupy these warehouses, some of these conversations around potential use of rail freight could be had much sooner than they are. I think quite often it's a discussion that's had after occupants have moved into the warehouse and they're already operating, they already have a road network all set up, when actually there's a perfectly good infrastructure in a rail interchange that they could be using, and perhaps the planners aren't engaging with the rail operators and the terminal operators soon enough to allow for us to be part of that solution as the warehouse has been fitted out and spec'd, etc. And so, as you said, John, they don't always specify what the terminal needs to look like. But if you're attracting a certain type of logistics operation into an industrial park, there's a certain kind of specifics around the terminal that you need to support that. And so the two need to be tied together, and they tend to be a little bit separate at the moment, in my experience, coming from logistics operations. You know, I had a number of sites that were at Durft when I was at Clipper, and we didn't make use of the rail freight terminal there, and there's capacity and there's opportunity for us to do so. I think that may well be happening now, I'm not sure, but I think there's opportunity with the logistics operators that's potentially not really tapped into at the moment, and we could collaborate more with those guys to again help generate more rail.
Yeah.
There's an obligation on the developers to build a rail terminal, but there's no obligation on the occupants of the logistics park to use that rail terminal.
Yeah.
So, you know, it just doesn't seem to come together.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a worldview where you don't want to make things too difficult for people, you know, and actually having tenants on rail link sites, I think, you know, it is a very good place to start, because at least they have the potential to use it. And certainly, you know, I do see more people having those conversations pre-let or at least early let about how those relationships can be. And, you know, Clipper put me in my place one time, Emma, when I suggested they might think about rails. So I think, you know, there's a maturing of relationship on all sides, and that collaboration is beginning to come. So Steve, you work this day in, day out. You know,
absolutely. The one thing I would
warehouse occupiers onto trains.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that we're fortunate that we work with a very enlightened developer at iPort, in so much as they've always wanted the rail freight terminal to work, not only to work so that it washes its face commercially, but also to make sure that it works for the iPort logistics park itself. And so we're in on the very early conversations with potential tenants to try and sell the benefits of the rail access that we have. And that works sometimes, it doesn't always work. Some are not interested. I'll give you an example. Lidl, for example, who are at iPort, have not been terribly interested up to this point. Neither were Amazon in the early days, but they're changing their tunes hugely now. So we're having some very detailed discussions with them about use of iPort. So people can be brought around. You've got to work at it, though. It's you know, it's something that you have to work hard at, convincing the tenants of these huge warehouses that actually rail can benefit them in so many different ways.
Okay, Robert, have we got some more questions?
Yeah, I'm jumping around a bit because there are lots of questions coming in. But does the rail industry need a mechanism to handle groupage or less than wagon or container loads?
Gosh, don't know, Emma. Do you want to
well, I think I think it probably does. I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to that, though, in terms of really being able to operate an effective and efficient network, because that involves kind of handling of product, basically. So a kind of second touch on product that potentially might make it more difficult to be efficient and cost effective. But I think it is a challenge that we set ourselves, and it's about different infrastructure and different assets, and working with customers really to understand whether or not there's enough, I guess, in the lead time of a product, and whether or not the cost is sustainable to handle product again before moving it by rail. I think so. Yes, but not very easy to achieve would be my answer.
John, would you echo that, or do you
I think it's horses for courses, really, and I think that if you've got an aggregator who's able to consolidate all the groupage and make up one load and then deliver the one load into people like GB Railfreight, Freightline and us, I think we're more geared to handling that scenario, because our terminals are, you know, quite constrained, land constrained, and really busy, and they have to be to make any money. So the only activity that we want to take place on our terminals are trains coming in and out, trucks coming in and out, and you know, the cranes and the reach stackers working between the two of them, doing things like repairing containers and consolidating loads and taking pallets off at inland rail terminals. That's not the place to do it.
Okay. Robert, next one.
This question from Derek Potter. Hi, Derek. He wants to know what benefits might accrue to rail freight from the free ports that we have announced.
Thank you, Martin. You're in a free port, winning free port, I guess.
Yeah, we are indeed, along with many others, of course. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think the jury's out on that, quite frankly, at the moment. I think the jury's out on free ports per se, quite frankly. Obviously, I mean, the hope is that they'll generate free flow of traffic and trade, and obviously generate increased business for those particular areas, which I'm sure that the potential's there to do that. So in that respect, again, it's another opportunity for rail freight to take advantage of. But I think it's too early to tell how these areas are going to sort of develop and pan out at the moment. We just have to have a watching brief on that one.
Yeah.
Steve, you're working with the Humber. Is that a shared sort of view?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I mean, we at iPort bid for a South Yorkshire free port, but we're unsuccessful. I think largely because Humber were successful and we are that close to Humber, it wouldn't have made sense to have had two free ports sitting side by side. But working closely with Humber, what we're looking to do, because one of the key things we're trying to do at iPort is to get ourselves customs clearance ready, and we're pretty much 95% there now. Once we are customs cleared, certified, we can then work with the likes of Humberside through the free ports to create customs corridors, or a customs corridor between the free port of Humberside and iPort, so that it allows people to bring goods in, get them all as far as iPort, perhaps to the anchor clients, and not have to pay duty until it leaves the iPort itself. So there are some benefits in us being on the other end of that customs corridor, if you like, and that's one of the things that we're talking to Humberside about at this moment in time. The same applies for Teesport as well, because we're connected to Teesport, so there's no reason why we couldn't create a customs corridor from Teesport to iPort as well, and vice versa. John could be doing the same at East Midlands Gateway, I'm sure.
And Steve, just on that, we'll turn to John in a moment, because I know you're part of his own as well, John. But in terms of that customs clearance, that also would enable you to handle trains through the Channel Tunnel, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, and we're talking to clients already about Barcelona to iPort services, which are very real at this moment in time, and could be realised at some point, I hope. But they're real discussions, and they are terrific volumes as well, which are coming.
What's the name of the customer, Steve?
It's I'm not. Oh, did you get that? Did you get that, John?
Oh, you cut out at a crucial moment.
Sorry.
It's the Wi-Fi we're having today is just shocking, isn't it?
It's awful.
Yeah.
I feel like that.
Swiftly on before we breach some rules, John.
I'm beginning to feel like that 1970s comedian that.
Yeah, whatever his name was, Norman Collier.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Let's not go there. John, come on. Yeah, East Midlands, you're part of a free port zone there. What are you hoping to get from that?
Well, I think, as Martin said, is the jury out? I think this is essential to this government's building Britain back better again, or whatever the strapline is. And I think Rishi Sunak is, this seems to be his idea, and it's being seen as a way of the levelling up agenda. So the government sees something really strategic and of enormous value in this. I think bringing it down to the practical level, I think we need to talk to customers to see how they actually see it, because we will respond to opportunities and demands like that. But I think East Midlands, that could be a really interesting possibility, because it's opening up 3 counties that have been underinvested in for so long. If we can get ourselves, organised properly and present a great case. So I think I'm hoping that the free port is going to be a catalyst for growth and a catalyst for exports, because as we discussed earlier, we are repositioning so many empties on our trains into the ports. We don't earn the same money moving an empty container from Trafford Park to Felixstowe, Southampton or London Gateway. And we need to increase our revenue potential.
Okay, Robert, next question.
This is a question, I guess I was going to say it's more about domestic intermodal, but the customs clearance and the Channel Tunnel thing has sort of opened this up. Whether there is or likely to be a move towards using 40-foot pallet wide swap bodies, container swap bodies, possibly, rather than the 45 pallet wide trailer. Do people see that there'll be an equipment shift for domestic and maybe through channel traffic?
Who's got thoughts on that?
Well, if I could contribute, so if we're putting swap bodies on rail, ideally they need to be solid-sided. If we've got curtains and cords coming loose on the network, then they can cause absolute havoc. So if we're putting steel boxes on trains to carry domestic or international cargo, you've got to make sure that it's rear door discharge or rear door loading, because it's the only way of getting the cargo in or out. So you've got to look at the flow to see if it can be converted in that way. And the other issue you have is if you put a container onto one of our sliding skeletal trailers, they sit higher. So when you back onto a bay, you haven't got a flush situation. So the warehouse staff go crazy because they can't get their forklifts in and out. So you've got to look actually at the practicalities of some of these and look at it in more detail.
Devil's always the detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's up next, Robert?
There's a question here about express rail freight. Does the panel think it's a growth area?
Okay, Emma, do you want to talk that? So in Express, we're talking, I suppose, about small consignments,
Parcels, I guess.
parcels, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because before I joined rail, a Freightliner, and I was working in rail, I had a couple of operators come and talk to me about this in my time in Clipper, and I think intuitively the idea is quite attractive. Around moving high volume of parcels on a high speed network through the artery of the country into kind of conurbations where there's a large population. Sounds attractive. The challenge I always found, I'll be honest, when we talk through these solutions was really that final mile, because we still have the final mile. You still got to handle that parcel. You still got to get it to the 50 million postcodes or however many there are still in the UK. And so it's kind of joining the dots, and I think moving parcels by express rail, absolutely, there's a lot of value in that. Then working out, but the kind of final mile delivery to the addresses in the UK, I think I haven't seen anything that's made that any more compelling than what we see from the parcel carriers at the moment. I think it will come, but I haven't seen a business case that works that's really compelling so far, but I think that will come as there's more kind of final mile delivery options available to us, click and collect type solutions in stations and or in and around stations. I think that becomes a lot more viable. I'm not sure it will ever be the bulk of the express traffic, but I think there's a proportion of parcel traffic that could lend itself to it, yeah, especially click and collect.
Steve,
yeah. Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I've been party to a number of discussions and inquiries with potential customers and potential operators of such services. I mean, there are discussions going on about conversion of passenger trains to carry these parcels. We've been on the end of discussions about whether or not iPort, for example, could take one of these trains in and load parcels, along with a customer who appears to be very interested in doing something along those lines. Big online retailer whose name will not be mentioned, but there's a lot of conversation going along around about this subject at the moment. I'm a little bit like Emma. I'm not sure when it will happen. I'm sure it will happen at some point. one of the discussions we've had is about express parcels from Doncaster, for example, down the East Coast Main Line into King's Cross, and then utilising electric vans to deliver around London and the surrounding areas. That all sounds wonderful if it would work, but there's an awful lot of work to be done to get to that point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly in my experience, the people out there who are the most excited about this potential are the city regions. If I speak to Manchester or Leeds or London or Birmingham or any of them, it absolutely ticks their buttons. And I think, that sort of price point comparison becomes interesting if you thought that cities were going to start being more prescriptive about what can and can't go on within city regions. And I think, if you look at London with ultra-low emission zones and restrictions on HGVs and those things, then you can see how you end up there. And so I think that price point question is coming and probably will move. And I think the mode question is coming as well. I was talking to a certain high street retailer or online retailer who can't be named even by Steve the other day, and they're running their first e-cargo hub out in the city of London from a currently disused car park, and they're doing that as a trial, but nonetheless they're putting money where their mouth is on those trials now. So I think it's going to be interesting. Do I see it as a distraction from mainstream rail freight, if you want to call it mainstream? No, I don't. I see it, as an addition to it, really, and something that's complementary to all the other things we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Robert, cue us up the next question.
Yes, there's a question about reefers and fresh produce by rail. Does the panel think this is a growth area and worth investment?
Thoughts, Martin? Do you get any through the port? Oh, your sound's gone again.
I hope it hasn't,
You'll have to sign out again, Martin.
I think you might have to go out and in again. Obviously, the Wi-Fi signal in Ipswich isn't what it should be today, I'm afraid. Reefers, John, is this something you've looked at all?
Yes, so it's a growing portion of the cargo coming through the ports. Obviously, the reefers, because the product inside needs temperature controlling, so they need power or they need rapid transit. And I think in the past, rail hasn't competed in this sector, and I think that it can. And I think we've developed a mobile power unit to go inside the wagon next to the reefer, and it's got lifting twist locks as well. It's got the corner casting, so we can lift them in and out, and so it can provide permanent power. So if it's 26 tons of prawns, it's not going to stink to high heaven the following day when it hasn't had been chilled. So if this works, then I think it's got a role to play, and that could be a lot of business.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. We've had a number of inquiries, some increased inquiries recently about whether or not we could handle reefers at iPort, and the answer to that is yes. But I think talking to end customers about this, there's a perception that their goods could become damaged as a result of delays, which they perceive to be, a railway thing. What if a signal fails? What if my goods are all stuck on a train for 9 hours at such and such a junction? What's the answer? So, and there are some technical ways around that, which people are already using, but I think it's about changing perception as much as anything else within the rail industry.
I agree, Stephen, and rail is more reliable than road if you look at statistics. So I think you're right, it's a perception that we need to manage with customers. We do move some reefers by rail, and we do absolutely think that it's a growth area, Maggie. I think, and I think if you look at the geography and I guess the distances travelled in the UK also, we're not an enormously large island, and so it's totally feasible that you don't actually need configurator on a board, so you can move the reefers without having to do that. And so I think there are, depending on the product and depending on the customer, there are different options available. But like John, it's something we're working on in terms of developing the technical capacity and capability to be able to do it. We already move fresh produce by rail at the moment, and we'll continue to see that to grow, I think, especially through the port of London Gateway.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, a lot of the goods that we move on trains are time sensitive, even if they're not in reefers and day in, day out. You know, we're delivering to those customers' timeframes. And, you know, I suppose there's a discipline as well about letting people in the rail industry know which are the most critical trains, and, you know, not standing them for 9 hours in an unsuitable place, but getting them somewhere that they can store power or be rescued if necessary. But so it sounds like some interesting developments there. Martin's back. That's great. Robert, do you have another question?
There have been a couple of questions about rail links between China and the UK, and who are the players? What can the panel just illuminate some of the audience about what they understand by it, and an aspect to do with transshipment of containers? About, I guess that's the final leg, whether it's by sea or by tunnel.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not really a question. I've just read out a few things just all at once, but maybe the panel's thoughts on it.
I mean, look, from my point of view, New Silk Road, you know, it's been really, really interesting. We've had a couple of trials into the UK through up to London Gateway, I think, on both occasions. I get a little bit frustrated when I see people on your fabulous multimodal website advertising a new rail service to the UK from China, and actually it goes to Germany and then it comes over on a ship. I suppose, you know, it hasn't come on a plane, so maybe that's something for the environment. But what do the panel think? Are we ever going to get plumbed into that network? I mean, Steve, you're looking at Channel Tunnel a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, and again, we've had a few inquiries. They're nothing more than inquiries, but I'd like to think yes. Certainly, I think the journey times compare well if people can be persuaded to do that. But I can't see it on the horizon at the moment, unfortunately.
Martin, what about you? Do you think you know, things like the sewage blockage are going to change people's perceptions, or is this just a blip that's going to settle down and go away again?
Well, I think as far as this, sorry, can you hear me properly this time?
Yeah, we can.
Good, excellent. I think the sewage situation has to be sort of, you have to look at that in context, really. I mean, the number of ships going through the Suez Canal every day, and these events are very, very rare. So long term, I don't think that's going to have a significant effect on things. The trains from China, which I think, as you rightly said, Maggie, I tend to terminate in Germany at Duisburg. I believe the price point is sort of halfway between sea freight and air freight as far as the customers are concerned. So I think there is a market for it. I think it's quite limited, and I think it's likely to remain a niche, to be honest with you. I can't really, like Steve, I can't, although there is a certain amount of potential there, I can't really take it. I can't see it taking a significant market share, really, of traffic coming in from the Far East.
No. I think it's done quite well in the last year because shipping capacity has been tight, and everybody's been desperate to get their hands on PPE. So, you know, that's represented a big portion of what's coming across, and let's hope that we won't have to be wearing masks and aprons in too long a period, and all that stuff can end up in the dump somewhere.
I think Martin's colleagues have imported enough PPE for us all to have a mask a day for the rest of time, haven't you?
Yeah.
But before we get on to politics, let's move on to the next question. What have we got, Robert?
Yes, we could always do with a few more, but this is a question, and I guess, Martin, you might have to field this one. It's what work is being undertaken at ports to allow the movement of import containers straight from ships to the rail terminal stack, rather than from the yard stack, to avoid maybe some double handling and stuff like that. I think you alluded to it earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, and this comes very much to the
the input of early information from the shipping lines. Basically, again, if we can receive pre-nomination detail in respect of import boxes coming into Felixstowe and that are destined to move by rail, I mean, obviously that gives us the opportunity to do exactly that, to move them direct from vessel to a position in the container park, which is, if not adjacent, and very convenient for the rail terminal. And we are working very closely with a couple of our customers trying to achieve that. And we are seeing some progress, actually. So going forward, I certainly see that becoming more and more important, really. Again, particularly as volumes grow and the rail side of things gets busier and busier. I mean, again, this becomes absolutely crucial, not only for import flows, but for export flows as well. It very much helps our planning process if we know exactly the number of containers which is arriving on a particular train, for example. If we know the number of empties compared to loaded, I mean, obviously the empties go in a slightly different area to the loaded boxes. And if we can get that sort of information in advance, that very much helps our planning process.
And Emma, is that something you're seeing across the portfolio of ports?
Yeah, I mean, we work as closely as we possibly can with the ports, because clearly it's in our interest to ensure that information flow, and it also makes us more efficient in our terminals. And so we work very closely with the Port of Felixstowe, as well as the other deep sea ports, Southampton and London Gateway. I think we kind of have visibility. Our customers provide us with information on boxes coming into vessels, and I think between the parties of the supply chain, we all have the information as to what needs to be what's going on rail. It's not always joined up, but I think increasingly now, when we're having our kind of monthly reviews with the ports, there's always a discussion around communications, data and IT, and how we can make that go fast. And as I said to you before, we at Freightline are making a massive investment in our own terminal operating systems, which can connect directly into both our customers, into our ports. And so not just it doesn't just help with our efficiency in terms of moving boxes to the terminal straight from the quay, but it also means that there's so much more visibility for our customers, so they can know exactly where the boxes are, and they can look at a screen and know exactly where the boxes are in the supply chain. I think it's all there. I think the data's all there. We haven't always joined the dots, and I think the sector's starting to do that now.
I mean, I think that's really encouraging, because, just sort of sitting here on this webinar, I've heard my doorbell go about 3 times, which will be the Hermes lady and the Amazon delivery. And I'm not quite
Mine
sure
too.
what the third one is, but, you can go onto your average app and track your parcel and know that there are 300 drops on the van and you're number 211 or whatever. So I think if we can start to get that discipline into rail and build that confidence in our customers that they've got that traceability, then that absolutely has to be a good thing, because absolutely, bluntly, we've been behind the curve a bit on that, I think, as you say, Emma. It's been available on the road sector to a much higher degree for some time, and it's great to see rail starting to join that up. I mean, John, in your business, you must have these systems cross-modally for your customers, I guess.
Yes, indeed. And so what's happening at the port is more or less what's happening at the inland terminal as well. So we've got a fleet of trucks based at each of our rail terminals, and there's no point stripping a train, piling the boxes up, only to find a driver coming in at 6 a.m. for a container that's 18 deep. That is the height of inefficiency and, frustrating for the drivers. And if we're going to be late, then it's no good. So we will be synchronizing, and we do need to develop better systems. We're getting there, but we need to synchronize the train and the deliveries with the trucks and the drivers. And, I think we pulled that off really well, actually. But I think it could be a more automated process.
Yeah. Thank you. How are we doing, Robert? Have we got some still to answer?
Yes, this one's actually been emailed into me, so someone's had a problem with the platform, but and it might be directed at you, Maggie. It's about what the panel think about air rail hubs, such as at Edinburgh and possibly at Birmingham and Manchester, and whether there's any developments or interest or activity in that.
Okay, so in a moment I'm going to go to John, because obviously East Midlands Gateway is right next door to Britain's largest air freight hub, but I mean, I think from my observation, what we're seeing is an increasing pressure for people not to use short haul flight, whether for personal use or goods. You know, this week the French government have placed a ban on any internal flight within France where for passengers where you could take a train in less than, I think, 3 hours or something like that. So you know, that's something that they're pushing forward with, and I'm sure, you know, when you talk to air freight carriers, you know, they've had a very difficult and disrupted year, obviously, for the obvious reasons of the loss of belly hold on passenger flights. But, you know, under normal running, slots are hard to find. And, you know, can rail fill some of the gap where air freight might have done short hauls domestically, you know, or indeed from mainland Europe into the UK? And, you know, we all know that the air freight also has quite a lot of road legs in it, so there's a complicated sort of network there. I suppose the observation that I would make is that if you're going to look at that, it may not be airport to airport. You know, if you're coming in from mainland Europe with air freight traffic, does it have to go to Heathrow? Should it go somewhere else? Should it go direct to iPort or wherever? So I don't know, but it would seem to me that there are structural shifts in air transport, and that could create opportunity. But John, you know, East Midlands is right next to the airport. Do you see opportunity there?
Well, we started the collaboration with East Midlands Airport, and we'll be forming a board to manage the Freeport pretty soon. So we're looking for these areas of connectivity, but usually stuff that travels by air is stuff which doesn't want to hang around anywhere. It's fast moving, and so, you know, potentially we could be bringing in products that go into manufacturing in a Freeport facility in East Midlands before then being exported and shipped out. So that's where I see it happening. I don't see it being part of a sort of a rapid logistics leg. I think we operate at different tempos. But as part of Freeport, and what the government is trying to achieve in terms of, as I said, the levelling up agenda and more export, then we could be bringing in components to go into manufacturing.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I think if you look at the big site that Royal Mail are building out at Daventry 3, you know, you can understand that they're looking at how they shift their logistics and do things a bit differently. So there are some moves, I think. Yeah. Robert, another one.
Freight operating companies seeing a better balance of imports export at southern ports with regards to recent changes by shipping lines, or is there still an unhealthy imbalance?
Emma.
So we are seeing a better balance actually over the past kind of 18 months. If I look at data, not that I've been there for 18 months, but we are seeing a better balance. Two of the ports are better than the other in terms of the balance, but I'm not going to say which. But yes, we are seeing an improvement in terms of the balance. And as we've talked about already on this call, and where that balance doesn't exist, we're looking for other opportunity, domestic opportunity to backfill those legs, if you like, where you've only got one-way traffic. And so, we always expect that there will be an imbalance, and we acknowledge that as supply chains move around. But it is definitely an improving picture, and more opportunity to fill those legs anyway with domestic traffic, we think. So it kind of helps make our round trip utilisation on our trains much more kind of economically viable, I guess. So yeah, an improving picture.
And taking across the piece, you know, we're starting to see an uptick in services to, you know, ports across the UK. So Liverpool to East Midlands, Tees port into iPort, you know, the Humber looking very hard at what it can do, as well as, you know, sustain growth further south. But does that help with that import-export balance? You know, the sort of the triangulation of containers and services, is that net gain in that debate?
Well, I think it can, and I think it helps balance the supply chain almost. And I think it's a kind of, we're seeing a slow shift towards the north, I guess, which I think will definitely help the export picture. And so, yeah, I think it will, Maggie, I think we're you know, we're still, it's baby steps, I guess, in terms of what we're seeing as for that network opening up, but we're very hopeful. And when we look at our strategy over a 5-year kind of profile, we definitely see a shift towards the kind of, you know, the northeast and the northwest in terms of volumes. So yes.
And Martin, from your point of view, I mean, you've already articulated, you know, the sort of the difference in shipping. But getting more services out of Felixstowe, because, you know, that we all know that irrespective of that drift north, there's growth to be had. You know, what are the things that you're looking at to both, you know, balance that import-export debate further, but also, you know, get more on rail from the port?
Well, the import-export debate, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because unless we get a fundamental change in UK manufacturing strategy, then I don't see how we're going to overcome that. I mean, ever since I've been at the port, I mean, every container that we take off a ship is full. 50% of all the containers we put back on vessels are empty, basically going back to the Far East for repositioning. And, you know, fundamentally, that's not going to change overnight, unless, as I said earlier, there's some sort of fundamental dramatic change in UK manufacturing base. You know, but, you know, having said that, of course, you know, the empties have still got to come back. You know, the empties have got to come back and they've got to be repositioned back to wherever they came from. So again, that's not going to change. So in terms of actual number of containers, you have got a balance there. It's just that the containers coming in tend to be full. And as I said, at least 50% of those going the other way, going out of the country, are empty. I mean, that's a very difficult, to try and change that balance between full and empties is very, very difficult and will take a lot of time and investment.
Folks, we've got about 10 minutes left until the end of the webinar. So if you've got urgent questions that you haven't been able to drop onto the platform, you'd better get them in quickly, I think, because time is almost upon us. But Robert, tell me, we've got a couple more left.
I'm combining a couple here. There's been a question about network rail capacity, and the panel has already discussed the absence of some passenger trains changing capacity. But do people also think that stuff like waste to energy projects will put challenges back onto that capacity? So it's an overall question. How do the panel think that network capacity will pan out in the short to medium term?
Well, let me offer a couple of thoughts, but then we'll open that up. I mean, I think, you know, John's recognised the amount of money that's going into the passenger railway at the moment, £22 million a day or whatever the number is. But, you know, that passenger growth has to come back. You know, I think, you know, many of us are frankly desperate to get back out and back on a train and go and do things and see people. And, you know, this week's unlocking hopefully is a step towards that. So passenger numbers will come back. The question is of course, how much? And I think the conversations that I'm having with Network Rail and government, and indeed others are as well, is about saying, well, when you put those passenger trains back on, put the right ones back on. You know, we don't, you know, if you think you don't need to have all of them, at least for now, which are the ones that would be really beneficial to freight if you didn't put them back on. And, you know, the corridor across from Felixstowe is an obvious case where those questions are being asked. Of course, this requires government to take a couple of hard swallows at, you know, not necessarily putting back on all the passenger trains. And you know, I know there's some scratching of heads about the sort of the politics of that as well. But freight makes a very compelling case. The business cases are good, and we're working hard on some of the value of freight data that can help support those arguments with ministers and with government as well. And of course, we know that there are enhancements to the network that are in the pipeline there, you know, and we have to make the case for them to come forward as well, not only HS2 and what that brings, but places like Ely Junction, which I know is close to Martin's heart, and other places like that. But Emma, in practical reality, you know, there are places on the network where you can't run those extra trains, but there are places where you can, aren't there? And how are you finding that balance?
I mean, we have found during COVID, actually, as I say, Network Rail have been really supportive of us, and we're very hopeful that they've seen some of the benefit of kind of allowing us a bit more flexibility during COVID. And that's when we started doing our trials on longer trains, running additional services to support moving PPE around the country, etc. So we did, you know, we have found that there's there's available capacity, obviously, over the past few months. we hope that not just us, how I think all of the rail operators have benefited from that. And so we're really hopeful that Network Rail will acknowledge that going forwards and therefore give us more capacity. And as you say, not kind of overburden the network with passenger traffic, which isn't going to be fully utilised. And so we do remain quite positive. As you say, there's been ongoing infrastructure work in the network over the course of the last 12 months. We've been involved in some of that. And so we're very positive that we will both be able to run more longer trains, longer, heavier trains, and that there will be more paths available to us going forward. Of course, HS2 will unlock more, but I think before we get there, Network Rail have acknowledged the benefit of seeing rail freight operators being able to run more trains and have more capacity available. So, yeah, I'm pretty positive about it as we sit here today. All of the mood music we're hearing and the conversations we're having with Network Rail are extremely positive in that sense.
And Steve, you've been looking at some quite difficult passing if you're looking at Humber to Doncaster, and those sort of short, rapid returns which need really excellent passing to make them efficient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you finding a flexible conversation?
Yeah, Network Rail have been great, and in fact, very encouraging. I mean, for their part, they spent something like 17 million upgrading that line, and have yet to see a freight train on it. So they're very, very enthusiastic and very supportive of what we're trying to do with ABP. There's certainly plenty of capacity on the line. There's no doubt about that. We've pretty much got our pick of it when we look at a shuttle service. So and Network Rail are also trying to make some changes around the Doncaster at St Catherine's Junction, that sort of area, to improve capacity over that junction, which will help us enormously. So yeah, very supportive.
Right. And Martin, some of these arguments are well rehearsed, but rehearse them again for us in terms of, capacity out of Felixstowe.
Well, I mean, John has already mentioned capacity on a couple of occasions on the call, and obviously we had the capacity improvements to the branch line, which were completed in 2019, which allows additional capacity on the branch line, which is basically between Felixstowe and Ipswich. It's then the connectivity going forward from there, really, which we need to sort on the basis that obviously one assumes that there's no more freight paths southbound down the GE. Then obviously but there are constraints obviously on the Felixstowe to Nuneaton route, and particularly as you mentioned at Ely, which is quite a big bottleneck that urgently needs sorting, really, to provide the capacity that both the port and UK PLC needs and rail freight needs to maximise the opportunity. Unfortunately, you are talking about a significant amount of money to sort Ely to the required standard, but you have to speculate to accumulate, and the longer it goes on, the more critical it will become. It's not the only intervention required, of course. You've got others, such as at Hawley Junction and the dualling of the line between Soham and Ely, for example. But all these capacity enhancements need to happen as quickly as possible in order for rail freight to be in a position where they can really maximise the opportunities that are available to them.
Yeah.
And John, you've spoken to us already about your frustration on that particular corridor, but looking more generally across your operation, what are the other things that would help you? Is it longer trains or more efficient paths, or opening?
Yes, longer trains, and I think more access through Manchester Piccadilly to our terminals in Trafford Park. Freightliner have one more or less adjacent to ours, and we can't get any more paths to those terminals, but we've got demand for our services.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating corridor. Okay, folks, we are really, really close on time. I mean, just on Castlefield corridor, John, I think we've come a long way actually on that, and some sense prevailing. But look, Robert's put his video on. This is telling me it's time to draw us towards a conclusion. We have a couple of minutes just for concluding remarks, I think. So So let me make mine and then I'll hand to Robert. So first of all, look, I think, thank you to all our panelists for what has been absolutely fascinating and really interesting session. I like to think I know everything about rail freight, she says modestly, but I've learned things today. And so it's fascinating to hear, of the positivity that we're hearing from all of you around the table, the opportunities that are out there. And even, the sort of the questions that we're getting in, which are, people asking about specific angles in their own supply chains and questions that rail is now shaping up to answer with, perhaps in a way that 5-10 years ago we definitely weren't. So a huge opportunity, I think, ahead for us in rail, and an ability to really tackle growth, to bring those new customers onto rail, and to start to make a real difference on sustainability. And for me, really rewarding to hear of things like, the investment in technology, proposals to better handle reefers, to sort of work collaboratively, spot offerings, how we can make the most of that, making, efforts to fill trains in both directions, and of course, bringing on new routes and new products to rail. Working with warehouse customers to better engage them from the outset and get them, engaged in rail from the moment that they take that lease on that warehouse on a Rail-Link site, whether that's iPort, EMG, Freightliner Terminal, or one of the many others around the country. So I think a really solid session, and thank you all for your participation and questions, and particularly to all our panelists, thank you for your time and input today. Robert, let me hand back to you to close.
Yes, and I'd just like to echo those thanks. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Sorry we didn't get round to answering all your questions, but we'll try our best to wrap them up afterwards and drop you a note with some answers on that. And I'd also like to add Maggie's thanks to our panelists to give of their time. And as John said, they were all unpaid. Sorry about that, guys. But we do appreciate your time and your support for doing this. It's been very much appreciated. So thank you very much.